Welcome, everyone. So if we could have the first slide, please, that would be great. Thank you. It's really lovely to have you all join us today. Thank you so much for being with us. And thank you also, especially if you were also with us last week. It's great to see you again. And we're just going to hang on a few moments to allow everyone to enter the webinar and get settled in. And even though we can't see your faces on the cameras, we are really glad that you're here with us today. So a huge hello to all of you and welcome to the second of 3 episodes of the Help to Grow Management Alumni Network webinar on employment rights. My name is Laura Acosta and I'm your host for today. But before we get into the topic and introduce ourselves, there are just a few housekeeping notes to go through. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the Alumni Hub before close of play today. And it will be housed on the same webpage you used to register for this webinar. Also to point out, there are 2 chat functions, so please use the classic chat to express any opinions or network with peers or voice any technical issues that you might be having. And then if you could please only use the Q&A chat to ask questions to the speakers, because we won't be addressing any questions posted in the normal classic chat. We'll be keeping our eye on the Q&A chat for questions. So by way of introductions now, myself and the 2 other speakers all work for Locke Associates Group. We are a group of solicitors and people professionals operating as a strategic partner to our clients, offering a range of comprehensive solutions to meet different people and organisational needs. With our expertise in employment, immigration and business law, dispute resolution, people initiatives and HR services, training, well-being and mediation, and coaching, we provide holistic support that helps drive a successful organisation. As people and HR specialists with a joint employment law function, it's our role to ensure that our clients are compliant with changes in employment law. And as you'll be aware, after the election of last year, the new Labour government announced the many changes in the employment law sector to workers' rights. And it has been a tricky area with not that much guidance produced as to what these changes might truly entail. And we are often asked to provide clarity on how businesses can ensure they are best prepared for the potential changes during this period of flux. So next slide, please. I'm now going to hand over to Amy first to introduce herself.
Thank you, Laura. And good afternoon, everybody. Really lovely to be here again. My name's Amy White, and I head up the training and wellbeing side of the Lock business. So day to day, I'm mostly designing and delivering training and people management interventions to organisations of all shapes and sizes. And I do that from my background as an employment solicitor. Before joining Lock, I was a partner with a regional law firm. So I've seen it from both sides. I've seen the tricky things that employees encounter, but also the challenges that managers are up against. And I hope to bring some of that to you today. Thanks very much for having me. Over to you, Claudia.
Hi, thanks so much. Really good to be here again today for our second week. So as Amy said, I'm Claudia. And day to day, I support clients with strategic human resources management. My official title is I'm the Group People Director. I mainly work with senior business leaders to support them to align their people plan, to support the vision and the strategy of their organisation. I am really passionate about enhancing employee engagement through progressive, people-focused ideas. And yeah, really delighted to be here again today. Thank you very much.
Lovely. And as I said, my name is Laura, and I am a training and wellbeing consultant at Lock. And I offer our clients workshops and programs in leadership development, organizational culture and wellbeing, as well as one-to-one or group executive coaching, as I'm an ICF ACC coach. I'm also a mindfulness teacher, an edutherapy, bereavement and loss specialist, and I'm very passionate also about improving access to knowledge about the menopause, as I'm a menopause experts group licensed champion. So welcome to the second session in our Help to Grow series, intended to do just that, to help you to grow your business from the starting blocks to the development stage, right the way through to the continuous nurturing of a thriving business. We expect the webinar to last between 45 minutes to an hour. And today we're focusing on employment rights, implementation and risk management. Our aim is to equip you with a clear roadmap to update critical policies and implement them effectively across your organisation. We're hoping to show you how to manage the additional financial and operational impacts of compliance with the new regulatory requirements of the Employment Rights Bill. We're going to engage in a conversation on this topic, hearing our speakers' input and insight before taking some questions from you at the end. And we will be using Zoom polls from time to time to interact with you throughout the session. So hopefully you'll be able to respond to those and we'll get some real-time feedback on the questions we're asking, which will be great. So let's make a start as we have lots to get through. You can see the slide there that says, what will we cover today? And as I've mentioned before, this is a three-part webinar series, and it's designed for forward-thinking leaders like yourselves who want to drive meaningful organisational change while staying compliant with upcoming legislation. We realised that last week in our first webinar, there was a lot of information to get across and for you all to digest. And we wanted to remind everyone that the content of the Employment Rights Bill is still shifting, as you may be hearing about in the news. So the benefit of being closely connected to people like us here at Lock Associates Group is that we can advise you and work in collaboration and partnership with you to address any queries or concerns you might have and to help you implement the most effective and future-proof solutions and policies in your business. So today's session is specifically about giving you that roadmap to update the policies and implementing them across your organisation. And we're going to be covering what are the critical policies to update. We're also going to be looking at what is best practice for onboarding and probation that reflects modern employment standards and that will help set your business up for success. We want to be talking with you about how to successfully implement new or enhanced policies. And we'll also be touching on conflict management and addressing sensitive issues. We're going to come again to talk about rethinking flexible working, which we touched on last week, and looking at equality in this area for a balanced, productive workforce. And as I mentioned before, we're going to be looking at how to manage the additional financial and operational impacts of compliance. And of course, as I've mentioned, we will be concluding with a lovely question and answer, and we hope to answer all of your most urgent questions today. So I'm going to hand over now to Amy to take us through the first part of the webinar.
Thank you very much, Laura. If we can go to the next slide. As Laura just mentioned, we talked about the Employment Rights Bill last week, and we highlighted the fact that it really is quite extensive. When it was tabled in October, it set out a whopping 28 key reforms where employment law in England and Wales is concerned. And as Laura's just alluded to, we have had some updates since we last met, if you can believe it. On Tuesday of this week, the 4th of March, the government tabled 250 amendments to the Employment Rights Bill. Now, don't panic too soon. We're not talking here about new reforms, 250 new reforms. Actually, mostly what we're talking about here is tweaking, adjusting, altering the existing reforms and the language used to express them. But there are some changes that are worthy of note. So firstly, just to bring your attention to the fact that a new reform has been introduced that wasn't in the original bill, which is miscarriage bereavement leave. It will entitle parents in the workplace experiencing miscarriage to 2 weeks of bereavement leave. So do add that to your agenda because it is brand new. It's not something we will have discussed before. And in addition, I just wanted to draw your attention to the changes where collective redundancy are concerned, because we did talk about that last time. On that last session, I mentioned that the government was proposing to do away with the requirement that a collective redundancy involve 20 or more people at one establishment. Well, they've rowed back from that. We are retaining the language of one establishment. So for many, that will allow them to breathe a sigh of relief if you have multiple sites and you were worrying about suddenly having to cumulatively collect together all the redundancies you might be making. It might well be that another threshold is introduced that applies across a workforce, say making 100 redundancies across a whole workforce within 90 days, for example, but we don't yet have any detail in that regard. So I just wanted to bring you up to date with those two particular amendments. There are others, and we may well have questions on them later. But what this shows us, as Laura's mentioned, is that the bill is still evolving. So there are areas that we're not going to be able to provide precise, detailed guidance on yet. But that said, it won't surprise you to know that our view is there's still preparatory steps we can take and actions we can be implementing to set ourselves up for success when the bill comes into force. Because something that didn't change within that 250 point amendment document that the government tabled on Tuesday was day one rights. They have remained top of the government's agenda, top of the priority list. There is real commitment to making that a reality. So with that in mind, there's definitely preparatory stuff we can be doing. And in amongst that, we think it's really a good idea to start thinking about your policies. On the slide, we have listed 10 policies that it's worth either reviewing if you already have them or pulling together if you don't have them right now. There are other policies that of course are important, like your capability procedure, your disciplinary procedure. They might well need reviewing a bit later when we've got a bit more flesh on the bone, as it were, as to some of the reforms. But those on the slide currently are really connected with some of the more straightforward and probably quicker to come changes that the Employment Rights Bill sets up. So if you have them, great to review them. It's best practice to be reviewing your policies on a regular basis in any event, irrespective of changes in the law, to make sure they stay fit for purpose and they work for your organisation. And if you don't have them, now's a great opportunity to start pulling them together, maybe even start consulting with your staff members so that they feel the policy when it arrives is fair, they're bought into it, they're engaged with it. It won't surprise you to know that we don't have time to work through all 10 of these procedures and policies today, and I think you'd probably fall asleep if we tried to do that. So we're going to focus on two that we think are really relevant now and meaningful for organisations, and that is the onboarding policy and the probation policy. So if we can go to the next slide, we will drill into those a little bit. So first up, what do we mean by onboarding and probation? You might well have a sense of what we're talking about here, but for clarity and completeness, when we're talking about onboarding, we're talking about the way in which a new starter is introduced to and integrated within your organisation. That might involve the basic stuff, providing them with keys or a log-on, the right kind of technology. Maybe it's giving them a copy of the handbook. But it runs right the way through to the more cultural piece of embedding them in your organisation. Perhaps that's FaceTime with the CEO or making sure they understand your values and how they're going to live them day to day. Perhaps it involves making sure they understand how their role feeds into the overarching organisational mission. Oh, sorry, if we can just go back one slide, that's brilliant. I'm talking at length, apologies. But so when we're talking about onboarding and probation, it's worth just being aware of the meaning of those different terms. Probation, where we're talking about a probation period, we're talking about that initial stage of an employee's employment during which a manager is able to assess their suitability for the role they've been engaged to perform. It's worth just me pointing out that at present, probation doesn't actually have a legal meaning. It really is down to the discretion of an employer, whether they have any probation period within their contracts or how long a probation period might be. You'll often see 3 or 6 months, but I've seen a huge variety of different approaches to probation. Because essentially, it doesn't matter whether you have a probation period or how long it is, employers at the moment are still able to dismiss an employee prior to them reaching 2 years of employment without running the risk of an ordinary unfair dismissal claim. But as we know, and as we discussed last time, that is going to change because of the Employment Rights Bill. We are going to see day one rights introduced. So new starters will have the ability to bring an ordinary unfair dismissal claim from the first day of their employment. We expect there's going to be this initial period of employment, maybe 9 months, but we don't know how long yet, during which a light touch procedure will be possible to be effected in order to end an employee's employment. Again, we don't know exactly what that light touch procedure will involve. But essentially what this means is that probation almost isn't discretionary anymore. It almost becomes legally required. We'll have a statutory initial period of employment, and it will be crucial that during that period, managers proactively manage the performance of those new starters so that they can justify any decisions, particularly termination decisions that they might make during it. So, if you haven't got a probation policy particularly, then think about pulling one together now. If you have got it, review it now, because this is all best practice stuff, whether day one rights come into effect or not. And in terms of what goes into a policy of that nature, well, we want to set out the step-by-step process so it's transparent for an employee and clear to the managers applying it. So where probation is concerned, for instance, we might set out the way in which objectives will be set at the beginning stages of probation, how they'll be monitored and the consequences of not satisfying them. We might set out the training and support that will be provided during that period, and also the documentation that needs to be completed. We'll want to make sure we train our managers up in utilising that policy, because actually the easier thing to do is to update a policy. Changing a manager's habits and approach is the bit that's going to take the most time. And finally, it's also just worth recognising that putting these things in place now is great for your new starters. They'll have transparency as to the process they're going to be involved in when they start. But also, if they're getting set objectives, they'll understand, what does success look like? What do I need to do to be successful? Which is really motivating for new starters and employees at all levels. So, Laura, I think you've got a poll for us now where probation is concerned.
I absolutely do. So next slide, please. And we're going to ask you to contribute now, if you can, please, people joining us. Just a simple question, and there's only a yes or a no option in the answer. So do you currently have probation policy? And we're going to launch the poll now. If you could use the poll, I see a couple of people might have popped their answers into the chat, but if you could click onto the poll itself, whether it's a yes or a no, we'll give the group a few moments to do that. We've got about 70 people here. So just a little while to consider. Simple one, do you have one or not? And maybe now we could close the poll and just see what the responses are telling us. Ah, it's very, very even, isn't it? So 52% do have and 48% do not. Okay, so this may be something that will come up in the questions and answer session later, but that's really interesting that we have a group here where 52% already do have a probation policy. But of course, as Amy suggested, it might be worth even just reviewing it and see if it is fit for purpose and, you know, as robust as it really needs to be. Okay, so let me hand over now to Claudia, who's going to take us through the next section of the webinar.
That's great. Thanks so much, Laura. So we're now going to take a deeper, could we just, go to the next slide, please? Would be great. Thank you when you're ready. Okay, well, I'll carry on talking while we get that slide up. So yeah, as I said, we're going to take a deeper dive into what we mean by setting up for success. So we know that the probation period will become a crucial time for employers and employees, and that a well-managed probation period will minimise business risk, but will also foster a productive and engaged workforce. It will allow employers to evaluate an employee's performance, their fit with the team, and adherence to company culture. For employees, it provides an opportunity to understand the full breadth of the role and assess whether the organisation and the role aligns with their career goals. Regular check-ins and open lines of communication can foster a supportive environment. By addressing concerns early, employers can help employees understand expectations and make necessary adjustments. This proactive approach not only aids in performance improvement, but it also promotes job satisfaction and retention. One of the most significant advantages of a well-managed probationary period is the opportunity for timely feedback. Addressing performance issues as they arise, rather than waiting until the end of the probationary period, can prevent misunderstandings and promote development. Employers should establish a structured feedback system, incorporating regular reviews to discuss strengths and discuss areas of improvement. This transparency can empower employees, making them feel valued and invested in their role. Furthermore, it sets the foundation for a positive working relationship, which is crucial for long-term success. The vision and strategy of your business can also really play a part here, using recruitment, onboarding, probation to share the vision of your business and translate how that breaks down into strategy and assign business and personal objectives to divisions or service lines within the organisations and to individuals really can support setting up for success. So starting right at the beginning in the recruitment phase, the right person for your business will be someone that understands and embraces your vision. So I would say be really confident about sharing your vision, whether that's on your website, on your social media channels, in an interview situation. Think about your vision like a short story. Candidates will want to hear about where your business came from and what your values are, what type of culture you have, where your business is going, and how it's going to get there. Share with passion. Be passionate about your business. Most candidates want to join a business that takes their team along on that journey with them. So be confident in sharing the passion that you have for your business and the journey that you are on. Having a really clear and concise vision will enable you to define who you are as a business and where you want to go. And a vision that is really successfully communicated through your business means that everyone is on the same page. They understand the purpose and the direction of the business. And think about how you simplify that message, because less is more. Having a concise vision, it shouldn't be too long. If you have a vision document that's 10 pages long, it's like your team, they just won't remember anything on it or engage with it. So having a concise vision means that your team are more likely to engage with it, remember it, and understand it. Also share your core values. Your core values are instrumental in engaging your team. They really define who you are, who you want to be. They're like the DNA of your business. Consider also sharing with your team how they live those values, how those values can be weaved into everyday behaviours at work. Consider creating a document that references examples of how we live the values and how we don't live the values. Think about sharing your longer and your shorter term plans. Where do you want to be in 10 years, in 3 years, and just in 1 year? What do you need to achieve each quarter to be where you want to be in 1 year? For your longer term plans, they can be quite headline, just very, small bullet points. They don't need to be detailed, but having a detailed 1 year plan that shows the strategic goals, supporting how you achieve that vision, is really essential in creating success right from the start when someone joins your business. The next step on your journey to success is how you break down your vision into strategy and tactics in order to deliver your vision. And this is a really important aspect of managing people and setting them up to succeed, because your strategy is how you break down your vision into everyday actions, tactics, objectives, KPIs for your business, but also for your team. And also how you monitor them. How do you take steps towards that vision? By monitoring them, making sure people are doing what they're meant to be doing, aligning everyone with common goals. So across the whole business, from the owners to the leadership team, through to the newest trainee or apprentice, they understand the business objectives, the KPIs, and their personal objectives, because with that information, they understand the part they play in the business, and that's how you set them up to succeed. The final point on this slide, I realize I'm going on a bit, I get very passionate about vision and strategy, is how your vision and your strategy influences your people plan. So just quickly what I mean by a people plan. A people plan is a strategic framework with clearly defined goals that relate to the people within your organisation. And developing an effective people plan is one of the most important things you can do for the success and the growth of your organisation. Strategically planning, engaging and managing your workforce will ensure you have the right people in the right seat at the right time. So creating a master plan for managing and developing your team can enhance performance and engagement and set your business and your team up for that long-term success. Your master plan, your people plan, may include recruitment, retention, learning and development, reward, employee relations, engagement, even working environment. But what it's not is it's not a brain dump of everything you do for your people. It's looking at the vision of your people, the longer term and the shorter term goals, and deciding what needs focusing on that year or that quarter, even that month. So for example, one of your longer term goals might be, over the next 3 years, we need to create a succession plan for our future leadership team. So how are you going to do that? Really, you need to be focusing in your people plan on succession planning. How are you going to go about that? What talent do you have in the business? And in turn, how do you engage and empower a group of people to set them up for that and reward them for their contribution to the business? So sharing your vision, your strategy, your values, your targets, your KPIs is essential in managing people, setting them and your business up for success. While in the background, all of this is also supporting you minimizing business risk and reducing having those people issues that we don't want to see. If you are interested to hear more about vision and strategy, I'm very happy to talk to people offline. But for now, I think we're back to Laura for another Zoom poll.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Claudia. Your passion is palpable. So could we go to the next slide, please, just to show the question for this Zoom poll, which, no surprise, is related to vision and strategy. So what we'd love to ask the people here today is, do you, in your businesses, have a clearly defined vision and strategy? And once again, the poll will pop up and you'll just be able to click on whichever answer is yours, so whether it's a yes or a no, and be really careful with it. Like, is your vision clearly defined, or is it just on a, I don't know, the back of a piece of paper? You know, is it really clearly defined, and is there vision and is there strategy as part of it? So we'll give a few moments for people to respond to that. Again, it's just a quick yes or no answer. And to our great people in the background helping us with this, please could we close the poll now and see the result? Wow, again, okay. So we have 45% who do say they have a clearly defined vision and strategy. And thank you to the 55% of you who have said that you don't at the moment have a clearly defined vision and strategy. And we all have to start somewhere. We've all got to, you know, go through the motions of producing the vision and strategy and co-creating that with all the relevant people. So thank you very much for sharing that information. That's really, really helpful to us to know. And we are going to go back to Claudia now to tell us a little bit more about implementation.
Thanks so much. So if we could have the next slide, please, that'd be great. Thank you. So yeah, I'm not quite as passionate about implementing policies, but it is still very, very important. So this next slide is about ensuring that you get it right when you're implementing policies. So what we're going to look at is what we should consider when we're implementing either new policies or enhancing what we already have. So let's just start by saying that HR policies are one of the really core parts of any business, and they bind the whole organisation and employees together. They really do create clarity and provide a framework for managing employee behaviour, expectations and interactions. They provide a platform to show legal compliance and equitable treatment of all employees, and they create clarity to help establish a positive work culture. They also support employee satisfaction and foster a positive working culture. So we're going to look here on this slide at 10 key considerations that will support your business. So you get the right policy, and then you can promote engagement with it. So the first one is understanding your organisation's needs. So before drafting any HR policy, assess your company's structure. Think about the culture, the employee needs. You may even want to conduct some surveys, some feedback sessions, or focus groups to gather input. Also look at the industry benchmarks and compliance requirements to align your policies with the legal standards, which is obviously really, really crucial. Think about how you align your policies with company values. Your HR policies should really reflect the core values of your organisation, whether it's promoting a culture of innovation or teamwork or diversity. Ensure that every policy encourages and supports these values. The alignment will foster a cohesive working environment. Ensure legal compliance. We've just briefly mentioned this, but again, this is really important. And that's not just at the beginning when you put together the policy, it's also, as Amy said earlier, making sure that you regularly revisit it. So you stay up to date with changes in legislation and employment regulations and compliance, and even just best practice. Be clear and concise. Policies should be really easy to understand. Try and avoid jargon and make sure each policy is straightforward. Clearly defined procedures, processes, and consequences, if not followed, is also important. This ensures transparency and it limits confusion among employees, and it creates a really open and honest environment as well. Include flexibility. While policies provide structure, it's also essential to allow for some flexibility. Include clauses that might allow for exceptions in cases where rigid adherence might lead to unfair or impractical situations. Communicate effectively. A well-written policy is useless if employees aren't aware of it. Use multiple channels of communication: the intranet, the handbook, emails, meetings, other platforms. Think about your intranet and really how you can use that to engage people. Most people have an intranet, but often businesses are not using it actually daily. You know, we encourage people to look at our intranet, for example, every single day for news and other interesting articles and things. Offer Q&A sessions for employees to clarify if they have questions. Think about how you provide your training and your resources, conducting training sessions to ensure employees and managers fully understand the policies and know how to implement them. HR policies such as probation, harassment prevention, often require just a little bit more detail than just sharing of a policy and what it means, especially for those managers who are going to have to manage it day to day. Regular review and updates. The business environment is ever changing and your policies should evolve with it, not just in terms of legislation, but in terms of evolvements in your own business. So just regularly having a look at them, checking they are still relevant, that they're effective, and of course, compliant, as we've mentioned before. Getting leadership buy-in. Everything starts at the top in business, right? So ensuring the top leadership support the HR policies, that they endorse them, that they adhere to them, that they understand them, and actually that they're prepared to use them as well if need be. Finally, create a feedback loop. Encourage employees to share their thoughts on the effectiveness of the policies. Use their feedback to continuously improve policies and make necessary adjustments. This will increase buy-in and also just trust in the HR function. So by following these steps, your HR policies can be a foundational tool to drive employee satisfaction, engagement, and compliance. They're not just policies, they actually really form the backbone of your business. But again, what they are also doing is they are minimizing that business risk and they are supporting you to succeed. So I'm going to pass it back to Amy now.
Thanks, Claudia. And it falls to me now to talk about the really jolly topic of conflict in the workplace. So if we can go to the next slide. We probably all appreciate on the call that conflict is inevitable in the workplace. We will encounter it at some point or other. And there is some speculation as to whether the contentiousness of our workplaces might increase as a result of the employment rights bill, particularly maybe in those initial stages when you've got sort of employees on the one hand keen to enforce their strengthened rights and maybe managers on the other either not fully up to date or perhaps slightly resistant. But whilst conflict, generally speaking, is inevitable in a workplace, what's not inevitable is a destructive outcome to that conflict. Unfortunately, I've seen it in practice so many times that a small conflict arises, a small issue, a small dispute, and whilst it could have been resolved productively and positively, either it's mishandled or possibly even worse, sort of buried. People ignore it, put their fingers in their ears and just hope it will resolve itself. And 9 times out of 10, that isn't what happens. Instead, we see it spiral, it escalates, and that's when we see employment tribunal claims being lodged. So what can we do within our workplaces, particularly given that we might see this increase in contentiousness as a result of the bill and the reforms it proposes, to reduce the likelihood of conflict arising, but also respond to it reasonably if it does occur? And a lot of the stuff, particularly that Claudia's already talked about, will be helpful in minimizing the likelihood of conflict arising, because we will be creating this aligned and engaged workforce that is less likely to fall into disputes. But there are some other things that we can add to that. So first up, thinking about the communication channels that are available to our people. That might be looking at the communication channels between employee and manager, structured one-to-ones, appraisals, mid-year reviews, and the like. Or it might be looking more organisationally at regular town halls, the use of the intranet, as Claudia mentioned. What we want to be doing is ensuring that information can flow down to the workforce so that they stay informed and up to date and really understand where the business is going, the role they play, the direction of travel. But we also want to ensure that employees themselves have communication channels available to them to send information up, feedback on what's happening in their teams, provide information about concerns that they might have, open up about personal challenges that they might be experiencing. In my time in practice as a solicitor and these days in my practice as a workplace mediator, communication is generally at the heart of all the issues that I've encountered because it goes wrong so often. So at least if you put in place these structured channels, you're giving yourself a head start to avoid communication issues arising. In addition, we want to think about setting transparent performance expectations. I mentioned this at the beginning when we were thinking about probation, and it follows the right way through an employee's lifetime with your business. Again, so many conflicts that I encounter come down to a misunderstanding between employee and manager about what was expected. So being really clear with your employees about the expectations they face and making sure that is documented so that there is no dispute later on about what was actually agreed will stand you in really good stead. Alongside that, making sure everybody in an organisation thoroughly understands their role and their responsibilities is vital. Individually, that might look like a really clear job description. It might look like those clear objectives that really spell out to an employee what's expected of them. But organisationally, it might look like an organisation chart setting out clear lines of accountability so that there can be no dispute or disagreement about whose job is what, whose responsibilities are what. And finally, in terms of those kind of more preventative measures, I've mentioned those structured communication channels, and they are vital. But so too are the informal check-ins that managers have with employees, because these are the opportunities that managers have to build rapport with their staff, to discuss things outside of the day-to-day, to get to know their people as people, what drives them, what discourages them. And that will give your managers an advantage when it comes to actually managing people effectively. But as we say, even doing all this good stuff won't necessarily always stop a conflict arising. So what do we do then? Well, a bit of advice that you probably know, but you don't want to hear is act promptly, nip it in the bud. Delay really is the enemy when it comes to resolving a conflict, because, as I say, 9 times out of 10, if we ignore it, it won't go away. Instead, it will escalate. And it won't just escalate between the 2 individuals involved. It will spill out into the wider culture of the organisation. We have seen, certainly in my practice, I have seen conflicts between 2 people that have affected team members feeling anxious about coming into work because the working environment is unpleasant and therefore their own well-being affected. Team members feeling so frustrated with the lack of action that's being taken that they ultimately leave an organisation. So act promptly, nip it in the bud. How do you do that? Well, key in this regard is thinking about training and development, upskilling your managers in their approach to conflict resolution. And a lot of that will come down to, as we like to call them, the softer skills. How effectively do managers communicate? Do they know how to use assertiveness and empathy and active listening in their approach to people management? But it also might come down to building your manager's self-awareness. What's their default response to conflict? Does that help or maybe hinder them in how they respond to issues within their team? And finally, we go back to policy. It might well be worth thinking about putting in place a conflict policy that transparently sets out how we approach conflicts when they arise, from the reporting stage through to investigation and then through to outcomes. But also think about putting yourself in place a toolkit for setting yourself up for success when things don't go to plan. In that toolkit, we mentioned it last time, it's worth thinking about employment tribunal insurance. It provides a huge degree of comfort when things are going a little bit wrong. But also it's worth thinking about utilising mediation. That can be done via an HR team internally, but sometimes there's real merit in bringing in an external mediator in, someone who's independent and impartial, can sit the parties down, adopt a solutions-oriented mindset and lay the foundations for a positive working relationship going forward. But back to my point on delay here, bring us in early. Don't bring us in once the grievance is lodged and that formal procedure is underway. Get a mediator in before that, or try internal mediation before that, because that gives you the greatest chance of success. And the final thing that I just want to say on conflict, to make it a bit jollier, is that it's not always a bad thing. Actually, we love a bit of creative friction in our workplaces because it helps us innovate. And having a devil's advocate in a project team can ensure that any solutions we come up with are thoroughly checked to make sure they are as robust as they need to be. But the key thing is to make sure your team members and your managers know how to productively disagree and don't trip into that sort of destructive conflict territory. So see if you can harness the power that conflict is able to provide to your organizations and your teams by not just looking at conflict as a negative in all instances. And I'm now going to hand over to Claudia, who's going to think about another aspect of the workplace we can harness, which is a bit of flexibility.
Yeah, I think, do we have a Zoom?
Just before that, we're going to just...
my apologies.
That's okay. We're going to do another Zoom poll.
We thought we could switch it around to confuse you, Amy.
I was trying to think if that was constructive conflict or not, but I don't think it is now. So yes, a short poll really that does relate back. If you were here with us last week, we did do a little poll about flexible working, and we asked how organisations, managers felt about flexible working, whether they loved it, liked it, or loathed it. And last week we had 18% of the participants saying they loved the idea of flexible working, 53% saying they liked it, and 29% saying they loathed it. So today, though, our question is a bit more specific, and maybe you kind of know this information, maybe you don't. So have a go and see if you can answer the poll. And the question is, how many people in your organisation do work flexibly? Is it less than 50% or more than 50% of your workforce? So if we could launch the poll, please, thank you. And then our participants here today hopefully can go for one of those two answers. And again, we're not 100% sure how big your organisations are, but even if you're able to indicate if it's less than 50% or more than 50%, that would be really interesting for us. Okay, let's close the poll and see what we've got as our answers. So less than 50% is actually 68% of you, and more than is 32%. Okay. So that's interesting, isn't it? It's still quite a big proportion who have more than half of the workforce in a position that they're able to work flexibly. So I think that will be interesting with the Employment Rights Bill and the sort of considerations that are being thrown up with that. Thank you so much. If we could close that poll now, we will go to Claudia, who will talk to us a little bit more about flexible working.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And the next slide would be lovely. Thank you. So in this slide, we're going to consider how we create a balanced and productive workforce by rethinking flexible working and equality. So let's start by just defining what we mean by flexible working. So since the pandemic and the raft of virtual working that followed, many employees now choose to work in a different way to the traditional Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 in the office. According to ACAS, flexible working is a broad term used to describe an arrangement that meets the needs of both the employee and the employer as to when, where, and how someone works. So thank you, ACAS. I think that's a spot-on definition. It can include part-time working, home working, hybrid working, flexi time, job sharing, compressed hours, annualized hours, term time working, and team-based rostering. So lots and lots to consider. The Employment Rights Bill is going to build on the changes that have already been made to flexible working that happened last year in April 2024. So what we'll do, we'll just have a quick look, a quick reminder of those flexible working legislation as it is now. So the right to request flexible working became a day one right from the 6th of April 2024. And employees can make 2 statutory requests in any 12-month period. And a new requirement was introduced for employers to consult with employees before rejecting a flexible working request and reducing the decision period from 3 months to 2 months. So what is likely to change? Under the bill, an employer will be able to refuse a flexible working request on one of the existing grounds, only if it is reasonable to do so. Additionally, if an employer refuses a request, it must notify the employee on the grounds for refusal and why the refusal is reasonable. So let's look at what needs updating. A flexible working policy will need to ensure that it makes it clear that a request for flexible working will not be refused by the employer unless it is reasonable to do so, and includes an obligation on the employer to provide written reasons for any refusal and why the refusal is considered to be reasonable. What is pending? There may be additional regulations that specify what steps an employer will need to take to consult with an employee prior to refusing a request. If regulations are introduced, the ACAS Code of Practice on the request for flexible working will also need to be updated. And for this reason, it's unlikely that any change in this area will happen before 2026. In our webinar last week, we were asked actually at the end in the questions about the 8 reasons for refusing a flexible working request. So we thought it would be really useful to cover these off today. I think most of them are self-explanatory and we are a bit short of time, so I'm just going to whiz through the list. But if anyone wanted to us to expand on any of these 8, then put a question in the chat box or the question, the way you're meant to ask the question. I'm not sure if it is the chat box, is it? But anyway, and we will make sure that we answer it. So 1, the burden of additional costs. 2, inability to reorganise work amongst existing staff. Inability to recruit additional staff. A detrimental impact on quality, detrimental impact on performance, detrimental effect on ability to meet customer demand, insufficient work for the proposed working periods, and planned structural changes to the business. So that's your 8. And although they are reasons why you can refuse flexible working requests, I think our message today is that we really encourage employers to approach flexible working requests with an open mind. In particular, flexible working request meetings where you're discussing it. That's a valuable opportunity to listen and engage in a meaningful way with each other so that you are both fully informed. There's an evidence-based decision that is also to be made from that. So, you're jointly exploring alternative solutions together in that meeting. And if that request can't be accepted, it's important to do that and show that you've been able to do that. But investment in flexible working can actually bring benefits to employers and employees, can really, really help with better work-life balance, which is beneficial for health and well-being. It can make employment more accessible to more groups of people. It can help employers address labour and skills shortages, and it can also improve staff retention and recruitment. It also creates a diverse and inclusive workforce. So whilst refusing flexible working requests is possible, it is not without its hurdles, so it is worth considering, where possible and appropriate, building flexibility into job roles when thinking about designing job roles and advertising them, and sharing in recruitment that you are open to flexible working options. This can really support early and constructive conversations with existing and prospective employees about options to work flexibly. Business leaders and line managers play a really important role in creating a positive culture around flexible working. in their organisations, and managers being trained to help and handle requests fairly and reasonably. That's all really important as well. So don't be scared of flexible working, I think, is the message here. Kind of embrace it and try and make it work for your business so you can build a really, really engaged workforce. So back to Amy now to finish off the final slide.
Thanks, Claudia. Yes, so we're going to wrap up now, if we can go to the last slide. And what we want to just do at this point is sort of highlight that we don't underestimate the significance of the impact that some of the changes under the Employment Rights Bill are going to have on your organisations. From a financial perspective, you might be thinking about SSP and the fact that sick pay is going to be available on a statutory basis to more people earlier on in their sick leave. Or you might be thinking at the other end of the spectrum about expensive tribunal claims and the risk of those occurring. Likewise, operationally, you might be focusing on the fact that, of course, more rights means more policies and procedures. That's going to require more management time. And of course, there is a price tag attached to that. So we absolutely don't underestimate the impact that it's going to have. That said, we really would encourage you to, as far as possible, not dwell on maybe what we might consider to be the negatives of these changes. Because of course, the bill has been introduced not only to give workers more security and stability, but also with a view to increasing productivity, actually, and supporting really stable, secure economic growth. So perhaps now is a good moment to pause within your organisations, to take stock and to set a path for sustainable and inclusive organisational growth and development that is really compliant with these new laws, but also really focused on what you want to be as a business and where you want to get to. So in terms of key takeaways from today, well, I think, as Laura said, Claudia's passion for vision and strategy was absolutely palpable. So make sure you clearly define your vision and strategy and then cascade it down throughout your organization so that you do create that aligned and also engaged workforce, because of course that reduces the risk of disgruntlement, of disagreements, of disputes. Likewise, be really clear about what your organizational values are, particularly if you are going to start reviewing your policies and rewriting them or introducing them afresh. We want those values running through those policies so that they work for you rather than constraining and restricting you. And finally, we have to recognise that things don't always go to plan. And actually, things like employment tribunal claims are a known risk that we as employers face. So what kind of toolkit can we put together in readiness for those issues arising? Maybe that's employment tribunal insurance, as I say. Claims are a known risk. We insure known risks. Maybe we should insure tribunal claims. But maybe it also involves a training program to upskill your managers. Maybe it's around mediation, getting your HR team ready to do a bit of internally, or locating an external mediator who can assist in a timely way. Whatever it is, it's worth thinking about putting that toolkit together now so that you feel confident going into the next stage. And I think, Laura, I'm going to hand back to you to draw us to a close.
Yes, please. Thank you. So the next slide just says conclusion. So if we could move on to the one after that, we are concluding the presentation. And as all of us are suggesting, and the speakers in particular, you have a fantastic opportunity here to update systems and processes, create positive and productive workplace culture, understand and reduce and manage risk. And as we mentioned last week, you could undertake an audit, get some training offered to yourselves and your team, and definitely go through that process of consulting collectively, the whole team. So we're going to just tell you briefly about the next webinar and what the key takeaways are going to be from that, which is next week. And the three key areas that we're going to be covering then are embedding people-first strategies and principles into your overarching business strategy. We're also going to be looking at leadership strategies that inspire and motivate your team to thrive. And finally, we'll be really deep diving into how can you elevate your performance management processes so that you're driving not just individual, but also collective success. And moving into the Q&A part then. So let's have a look at some questions that have come into us. And of course, at this point, if you have any other questions that you're thinking about and want to put to us, then please don't hesitate to pop those into the chat function as well. So one of the questions has been around, you've mentioned some of the specifics of the bill, obviously, But what is the timeline likely to be? Is there going to be sort of like an expectation on companies to have implemented things by a certain time? Do we have anything we could say on that?
The timeline's fairly loose at the moment. So as I said, 250 amendments tabled on Tuesday. That's going to take a while to work through, and it's come off the back of a lot of consultation with businesses and trade unions. I think the expectation is still there that we might see royal assent within the summer, probably before the summer recess. And there will be some changes that are straightforward that can be implemented quite quickly after that. So the change to SSP, for instance, making it payable from day one, that's fairly straightforward to introduce from a legislative point of view. So that may well be something we see before the end of the year. Likewise, the changes in relation to the new duty to prevent sexual harassment might be something that's going to come into force a bit quicker, although there will be a degree of consultation needed there. So a lot of it will come down to how much consultation is needed as to how quickly these things can be rolled out, which is why, of course, that big change, day one rights, because it needs so much thinking about, we're looking to 2026. But yes, as you say, Lara, there will be an expectation that we're ready for it when it does happen.
Right. Which is the kind of follow-up question that we've had, which said, why should I take steps now if the bill is just being discussed and I don't have to? And it might not ever actually become law. Like we see some of these changes and amendments, but I think that there's a sense there that there will be parts of this bill that definitely are going to be coming in.
I think that's right, isn't it? Actually, what we saw with the amendments, yes, a few areas where the strengthening of rights has been slightly rowed back on, but actually the introduction of miscarriage bereavement leave is a further strengthening of rights, going further in the direction that was set out in that plan to make work pay that Labour produced before the election. So as much as there is that evolution still going on, I'm not convinced that we're going to see any of those significant changes being sort of stepped back from, because Labour have really committed to making those changes. So as to why we should do it now, well, of course you don't have to. You can wait, but what are the repercussions of waiting? Suddenly having to introduce new things last minute, not being able to give them sufficient time, those managers not having built those good habits and therefore making mistakes and potentially finding themselves in a tribunal claim. I don't know if you've got anything to add on that piece around that kind of why do it now.
I think it's just best practice, really. Probably would be what I would say, actually, because of course, complying with the legislation, but it is best practice to sort of provide employees with this type of information. And as we have shared today, it genuinely does help and promote engagement and clarity and all the things that we've shared today. That actually it does work.
And also, losing staff costs the business a lot of money to then recruit, onboard, go through training for all of them. So keeping the right people in the organisation is so important too. So we're really close to the end of the webinar now. So I'm just going to move us on to the next slide. We'd really love to stay in touch with you. So if any of you want to connect with us on LinkedIn, please do follow the company LinkedIn profile and sign up for our newsletter through the website, and we can keep you up to date with any changes as they happen. There's some really useful documents that you can download from our website as well. So please do have a little look on there if there's anything that you might be specifically interested in. And this slide just shows us the 4 boxes that summarise what LOC does, which I mentioned at the start of the presentation as well. We wouldn't be a reputable employment law firm if we didn't have a legal disclaimer. So if we could have the next slide, please, just to make sure that we've drawn your attention to our legal advice disclaimer. And finally, I just want to thank everybody, Claudia, Amy, and all our helpers as well behind the scenes. And it's been a really interesting conversation. And thank you to everyone who's contributed to the polls and to the chat and to the questions that we've had. And before you drop off, please do make sure to register for the final episode of our series, which is next week on the 14th of March. And as I said earlier, is focusing on thriving in the new environment. And we're really looking forward to seeing you again. And the webinar is at 1 p.m. again. And also in the chat function, there is a feedback form. So we'd be so grateful if you could just spend a moment or two filling out the feedback form so that the team at Help to Grow can continue delivering relevant content. And finally, look out for an email which will be sent to you today on how to access something that we've produced for you, which is called the Checklist for Organisational Review. And there'll also be some instructions on how you can book an HR review with somebody from Lock Associates Group. And you'll be receiving a recording of the webinar if you want to watch it again. So we'll be hanging around for a few moments if there are any outstanding questions. But for those of you who do have to leave us right now, thank you so much for joining. And we do hope to see you all again next Friday. All the best, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.